Thanks everyone for joining us. Nick, thank you so very much. First of all, my name is Chris. I'm the low-code lead at ANS, now officially Director of Digital Innovation, which is cool. And Nick, do you want to intro yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So I'm Nick Gilbert. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer for the University of Surrey. It's a well-respected institution in the south of England, obviously the higher education sector. And I look after really everything digital technology there. So highly centralized university, that's relatively uncommon. And I'm sort of responsible for where are we today and where do we want to take the organization digitally and then helping the organization do that and building the team that's able to make that happen. I also have a bit of a kind of sector-wide role in work that I do, and higher education is great like this. And I work as part of a sector body called UCISA that's really looking at the digital maturity across the whole sector and how do we help CIOs and digital teams across the entirety of the UK just do what they're doing and their really critical mission and do it better.
Oh, amazing, man. I've got to tell you, like, genuinely, I love what you put out on LinkedIn because I always see you supporting like other CTOs, other CDIOs. It's epic. So yeah,
I mean, look, I
yeah,
think tech is really hard. Digital is
yeah,
hard. I think I started when you're desperately trying to get modems to connect to things in weird ways. A lot of the base underpinning tech stuff has got simpler, but actually being a digital leader is a really tricky thing to be. And if we're not helping each other, then it just makes it really a really lonely place to be. And one of the beautiful things about my sector and local councils, NHS, government, we've got these so many sectors where we can share our experience with each other because we're not really competing. And that's just an awesome thing to be. So I think we're not spending our time doing that. They're just super lonely roles.
yeah. Oh, spot on, man. I love it. I love it. I wanted to ask, so like we're doing a lot of work with you guys now, but actually, and you're a very progressive guy with a very progressive goal in mind in a very progressive org, and I think you've done a lot of work to drive that. But what's the ultimate goal? Like, where do you want to be?
I mean, that's a really, really, really good
It's a hard
question.
question.
If you go and ask 100 people at university
Yeah,
what the university should do, you will get a cluster of answers and that are in the center that are kind of similar, but you get a really interesting, diverse range of perspectives. And I think that comes down to the fact that, necessarily in comprehensive universities, we've got on one side of the institution, someone researching the impact of Roman law on the UK common law system. And then the other side of the institution, we've got people either playing at the forefront of AI and the impacts of that on philosophy and psychology, or launching satellites, right? And so, it's really difficult to find a business that is as relatively small as ours, but that sits across everything. And that makes lining up people together to say, what's our goal? And like, where are we heading really, really tricky. So we've just come out of a 3-year strategy window, and universities will tend to use 3, 5, a 10-year strategy windows. And we're just starting that question around, okay, we've had this really successful three-year window. Surrey has dramatically risen in the rankings. We went from an NSS of 102nd in the country to now 4th. So that, on the back of everyone doing stuff. Digital's part of that, but it's not all of it. So we've had this hugely successful 3 years. And now we're really saying, what does the next 18 years hold for us? But we're really going to get into that kind of 5-year window. And I think what I can say is that in my bit, I know that digital will underpin what we're doing, and the institution knows that. And so part of my role actually is building a relatively flexible, mature capability that as we go through the strategy process, that in universities is much more about a dialogue than in many other organizations, right? We want to bring every academic on the road, and actually all of the people in my team and our professional services, because they all have really great views. As we go through that process, I need to make sure that my team is going to be able to deal with where we get to, what the outcomes are going to be. Now, we're probably not going to want to turn ourselves into the International Space Agency, for example. So there are some things we're not going to be, right? We're not going to sell pharmaceuticals to the world. There's a bunch of stuff that we're not, but there is actually a lot that we could be. And so building out a team that's able to respond in a really agile way to where the organization is going is absolutely vital for every CIO in my position. So I appreciate that totally didn't answer your question.
That's awesome.
Right?
I mean, I was loving the space agency thing, man. That's great.
So I mean, this is really cool stuff, right? I work for an organization that is absolutely world class in terms of satellite technology. Yeah, and it's so cool being able to do that. The flip side of that, we've got people that are doing groundbreaking research into challenges inside the NHS and issues of misogyny and workplace harassment for female doctors, and that's equally important and such a critical part of advancing our society. And so it's so cool being able to sort of check in on the kind of research that's outputting. That also creates challenges for us because we're really trying to almost be one of every kind of business as we go. So fun every day, and every day is new.
Right, that's Brett. I love it. I absolutely love it. And as somebody who's studying at the moment, I'm learning that as well. So you got a huge job in your hands. And I have to say, I've enjoyed watching you do this, bring the uni through from those layers into number four. That's crazy, man. But congratulations.
But I think what I would
Yeah.
say, without wanting to undermine the work that our organization has done, I think if you apply sort of a lot of the instinctive experience and digital awareness that digital leaders everywhere have got, and work with the right set of partners to be able to deliver it. It's actually really easy to do. It's hard work to make it happen. But
Yeah, it
but
is.
what you need to do to make it happen isn't the hard bit, right? Getting in those conversations with people and explaining why it is that we need to change a process, that's tricky. But actually the course that you need to follow is really, really easy. And actually you guys have been, the ANS team have actually been a huge part of that. The work we've
Oh,
done
thank
with
you.
Microsoft has been a huge part of them, just building out that experience layer so that our students kind of have what they want at their fingertips, and we're able to use a lot of that to drive kind of service improvement across the organization. And I'm super pumped about what we're
Yeah.
going to do as we start moving into our low code space and we start really building on top of that core platform.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm loving the project at the moment. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, I remember we were chatting, gosh, I remember actually meeting you, and then we just like started vibing and talking about the whole ecosystem approach. Do you want to just share a little
Yeah.
bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, love to. And I think and this is something that has evolved for me and grown for me as I've spent more time in the UK. So my background is working in Australia, and I work with higher education CIOs and academic leadership across the globe because we're such a collaborative environment. I'm able to, right? And so from Australia, you're talking to Australian and North American CIOs. They've got different kinds of pressures to what I was seeing in the UK when I came here. And one of the really, really interesting things for me, I think, is that we're in the higher education sector in particular, we're in a really unique revenue crunch situation right now. And that is hugely challenging. And it's not, you maybe got the New Zealand higher education sector that's in a similar kind of position because they closed all through COVID and they lost their entire international student market, largely
Wow.
generalizations. But the UK is maybe with New Zealand uniquely in a tricky position. And that's a curse, right? But it's also a blessing because it enables us to drive some divergent and emerging thinking. And increasingly, the we've really solved across a lot of the higher education sector this idea of not just home growing your own stuff and building it out locally, and we're getting stronger at being centrally driven, and we're getting really good at putting in big cyclical ERP projects, right? And actually, big chunk of most CIOs' roles still is about doing the ERP, doing the CRM. You're getting into these big monolithic platforms. A new student record system replacement is a great thing to be able to put the award on your shelf for. But what was becoming increasingly obvious as I spoke to peers in the UK was that if you add up the cost associated with doing all of those that you'd need to do over the next 10 years, there is zero chance that most institutions in the UK were going to be able to afford it. And people were just like starting to work out the fact that, hang on a minute, we're going to have to prioritize between three things, each of which we need to do. And so, the obvious thing that CIOs think get good at is saying, well, it's your choice, guys. You make the decision. You step into that kind of digital leadership role where actually you are trying to drive an effective digital estate and experience for your stakeholders. A compromised position where you're going to do 50% of what is needed is really not a great way to be running a business. And so that forced us and myself and my team, and working with people like the ANS team and just kind of talking through these ideas, working with the Microsoft team, but there are other vendors that have, that are playing in this space as well. What became really clear was that necessarily we needed to do less of these big cyclical ERPs where we're trying to fill 100% of our set of business requirements. And that increasingly we knew we weren't going to use all of those features. You know, we'd
No.
spend 4 years putting it in. We'd use 50% of the features, and then in 4 years we'd have to turf it out anyway. And so as we looked at it, the stuff that increasingly mattered was doing it quickly and doing it good enough and doing it in a cost-effective way. And you think about, how am I going to do that? Well, the only real way you can do that is by doing as much of it as possible in as small enough of a number of systems as is possible, right?
Mm.
And not having to integrate 55 different things, but integrating 3 or 2 or 1. You know, the more that you can scale down that challenge, so you're building in a smaller number of things as possible, the cheaper it becomes, the faster you can do it, and the easier it is in a relatively low paying sector for you to be able to get the right density of high quality talent to be able to run that thing for you. You know, rather than running 5 ERPs really, really badly, I'd much prefer to run one system with 80% of the features of all of those things, but do it really, really well. And that's really the reason, right? And I would say, in almost all circumstances in the UK, with perhaps the exception of 2 very specific universities that have a very, very, very strong commercial offering, I don't think the higher education sector in the UK has any choice but to move towards that. And you're already seeing this kind of coalition of the willing leaders in our sector in particular starting to play into that space. And I know you guys work with a lot of them, because you talk to them and I talk to them, and we talk together about the experience. So yeah, it's, to be honest, it feels really obvious, and it's not like, I'm not sure that we actually have a choice.
Oh, totally, man. I agree. I think this whole concept of monolithic delivery is changing so quickly. And the one thing that I think I said this to you before, but we're in the era of enablement, right? Like, digital transformation has changed. We're now like trying to enable people to do things for themselves, and that, yes, makers and things will do that, but also IT teams. So I'm watching your team literally change the way they're doing things now. It's amazing. I have
We've
one
got
last
really
question.
smart
Yeah, go for
people
it.
that can grow into
Yeah,
this stuff, and that are really mission enabled. And it's really a question of, what we've largely taken an approach that has been telling them what they can't do and limiting their capability. And you need guardrails in these things. I don't want a
defo.
bunch of student records to be sprayed onto the internet, right? But
No,
other than some of those things where we absolutely can't do it, I want smart people building great things for my organization and doing it fast, because they know that it's the right thing to do.
exactly. And when you enable them, which you are doing now, it's amazing to see how fast people are picking things up. So yeah. Um, One last thing. Okay. I know this is a super vague question, but I need a proper Nick answer on this one. Like, you've been giving them the whole time, but like, I need a full on like Nick answer
Yeah.
for this whole program, and the whole change in transformation. What do you think the future will hold, especially thinking about things like AI and all of that?
Yeah, fine. Um, I think AI is really cool because it's got everyone enthusiastic about what you can do with technology. I mean, people are scared. That is appropriate, as there's new technology, and and there are aspects of some of the stuff that comes out that scares me as well. But what's great is that sometimes getting people enthusiastic about the art of the possible is really, really tricky, and it's great seeing this kind of technology land, because it gets people pumped. And I
Yeah.
think, I'd contrast it to something like blockchain landing, where people were enthusiastic about it, but it was really difficult to kind of come up with compelling top to bottom business use cases for a lot of that. What did I saw an example of blockchain for faxes, and fax machines. You're like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
blockchain for property and selling property. You go, okay, fine. Do you really need to solve that? The really cool thing about AI is that that you can immediately rattle off the top of your head 20 different use cases for your business, and
Hold on.
most people know some of what those are all the way through the organization. So you get the VC, our VC, who's just super passionate about it. It's like, go hard. And that's great, because there's so few opportunities where tech transcends the boundary between super enthusiastic digital people that we're in it, right? We get it. But then having
Yeah,
CEOs pay attention is super exciting. So for us, though, there's stuff you've got to get in place for that to be effective. And it's your data and it's your process layer, right?
oh yeah,
AI is going to fit into a bunch of different workflows, but you need those workflows to be in place in order to be able to slot in. You might build them custom for it, but at some point it's going to spit out and do something. So for us, for example, we working with ANS, we put in place a ticketing platform we call One
yeah,
Sorry, but it's built on Dynamics customer engagement. That was there. It was a really deliberate. We wanted to get data coming out of it, but really the core reason for that was I knew that in the future I was going to build workflow that asks someone to do some work at the tail end of it. So I've got
yeah,
this modular thing now that I can get someone to do work, and I can start if I get the data right, and I get a process engine, Power Platform for us, I can inject into our processes AI-driven parts of that workflow. And that's, it could be sentiment analysis that says, hey, is this really, really high valence? Do I need to get this to someone faster? Right? There's a million different use cases in the higher education sector. And I'm not going to talk about too many of them because I could talk for a year on it. So for us, we are building out that data layer, enabling the platform right now, because that's what's going to enable us to use AI as one of the tools that
Spot on.
sits in a deliberately designed organization. And increasingly, as we build that platform, we're looking at things like our student record system. We're looking at a range of different best of breed platforms we've put in and saying, hang on, we could do that function inside this. What's another example of that would be our academic performance and review process. A huge process for academics because it defines whether they're going to become a professor. Hugely important in higher education organizations. Like, we know we're going to be able to build that out in the Power Platform. And historically, most organizations would go and buy a talent and development capability.
Spot on.
We have that in the pipeline. So I'm just essentially churning through these big best of breed capabilities and modules in them and just stripping it out, turning it into something that's in a shared ecosystem with a common data layer that's easy to maintain, and just progressively doing that over time. That's not sexy because it doesn't have big drops at points. I can't say, "Oh, I've delivered." Like we did do HR with Microsoft at Surrey, but it's not these big. I put in the new finance system things. It's once a month, 5 new processes go live.
Yeah, like 5 things come out. Yeah, you just keep on churning them.
And so the future for us is this cadence of delivery that our sector really isn't familiar with. That when they turn around after 3 months and look back and see that actually we've improved 20% of the technology stack, and then 3 months on, another 20% of it's been improved, and we just have this pace of change, which is going to allow us to keep pace with what's happening in the environment around us in the technology sector.
Oh, I love it, man. And you can only really do that in a proper, well-defined ecosystem, right? So
if I have to wait 12 months to go and build a business case to replace a platform, and then I go to market and spend 9 months going to market, and then then spend 6 months working with the supplier to work out what the contract and the requirements will be, and then I spend 2 years implementing it, I've just spent 4 years to do something that I can do in 3 months. Now, and the stakeholders need to be on board with me getting 80% of the features and going bang, bang, bang. They've got to be comfortable with it going live with 50% of what they need, knowing that in the next quarter, they're going to get another 30%. But we've built a lot of those relationships. They're kind of in play now. And now the pressure's on me to build that bam, 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 bam. And that is the only way that my sector is going to keep pace with all of the different changes that are happening. So, to some extent, there's bits of it that other institutions are doing well as well, where they're getting better in that case. And those of us that are doing that help set out this blueprint for other parts of higher education that they can feel a bit more comfortable moving to what is a really different model.
Oh, spot on, man. Well, I love that answer, and I love the speedy delivery approach. Well, listen, Nick, honestly, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat to you. And genuinely, I love the vibe. You always come with like these amazing answers that make me think way more out of my sort of spectrum. So yeah, it's hugely appreciated, man.
Right
Really.
back at you, mate. Absolutely right back at you, bud.